Hi everyone, my name's Kat Waters. I am the Academic Support Librarian for the History Department. I'm going to be talking with one of my colleagues, Sophie, about her research and how she's undertaken her research. It's supposed to be like a really informal sort of conversational piece between Sophie and myself. I'll let her introduce herself and then we'll progress into the session. Sophie.
Hi everyone, so I'm Sophie. I'm an academic support officer at the University of Warwick Library, but I'm also doing a PhD part-time on the site, so I'm in my final year now, final fourth year, hopefully the last one. But yeah, so I've been through the whole process of undergraduate, masters, PhD, so hopefully you'll find this useful.
Brilliant, thank you Sophie. So we were going to start talking about your project and how you decided on what area of research you were looking at. I thought it might be interesting for the students to understand kind of the thought process between, you know, like how you pick something that you might be interested in and how you look at whether there's a gap in the literature. So if you can kind of explain your process, that would be really good.
Yeah, so the reason I chose my topic really, I'll give you a bit of context actually, that would be helpful. So my study is like a regional study looking at the movement of spiritualism in the 19th century, how this challenged the Church of England and then the role that women played in this movement. I'd always really been fascinated by the 19th century, like any TV programme, any book that came out, I always wanted to read it. So it's always been sort of the one focus that I've always enjoyed in history. I did an assignment during my masters that looked at like spiritualism in the 20th century, and that sort of sparked an interest into that like religious movement and the side of things. So I just thought I'll see how it all began in the 19th century, and then it kind of just spiraled from there really. I just found out that there's so much more to it than what I first thought, but there wasn't really much written about it, and if it was a very like male dominated traditional perspective of history. So I thought, right, this is my niche now. I've found a little gap. I can fill this. So I've started to look at it from like a feminist gendered perspective. I did that for my master's dissertation mainly, and then that's led me now on to doing the research for my PhD thesis. So it's sort of built on the last few years of research really, but the main focus of like the 19th century has always been there since sort of like undergrad days. So that's kind of how I got to the topic really.
Do you think it's really important then when you are picking a research project that you pick something that you're sort of vaguely interested in? Do you think that obviously that's how you've managed to continue your studies and sort of continue your interest is because it is something that you're really passionate about?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think obviously for smaller assignments there's always like questions that you can find interesting in different topics. Like I did essays on things like Tony Blair, which like modern politics is just not my thing at the minute. But I always found something that was interesting within that. But I think for larger projects like dissertations and like thesis and everything, and especially if you wanted to go into postgraduate study, you need to have that like passion for the subject, else it just doesn't work. You don't get the motivation to sort of keep going back to the literature and keep reading it and keep finding new sources. So I definitely think you need to love what you write and love what you read to make it work, especially for bigger projects. So yeah, definitely enjoy what you're researching.
You said that you'd obviously done a little bit of research in the master's sort of area, but then you'd kind of identified that gap. How did you know that there was a gap? You know, like what sources had you sort of come across that helped you make that conclusion?
So I found it basically through secondary literature mainly. I think the only way really to find like a new lens on a subject is to just read as much as possible around that subject. And naturally, as you're reading it, you'll sit there and think, actually, I don't agree with that. So then you go off and search to see whether someone else has written something that you agree with. And the more you do it, the more you realise, actually, no, they've not written exactly what I'm thinking in my head. And that's sort of the way where I got to. So a lot of people had looked at my topic from a similar gendered perspective, but only from London, and they only used like London as a little bubble and didn't really explore it any further. Whereas there was always references to like the West Midlands and Birmingham and things like that, but nobody had ever fully explored it. So I was like, right, okay, let's do some more digging into this. So like my lens is more so a regional like my new lens is a regional one really. I have the same sort of like cultural history, gendered approach as other as like the historiography that's come before this, but just from a completely different region, which is good in a way because it links back to London, it links back to the existing historiography there, but it's just opening up a whole sort of breadth of knowledge about the West Midlands and how actually it started a lot in here. It wasn't just a thing that happened in London and that was it. So I'd say obviously check sort of geographically if there's ways that you can find a new lens, because a lot of times history does get focused quite heavily on like the north or London, and it's hard to find history about like sort of smaller areas. So there's always that option. But obviously if the like sources aren't there to support that, then you can always look at it from different perspectives, like from gender. You could look at it from a medical perspective, mental health, things like that. But mainly I would just say to read as much as possible around the topic. Read as many books and articles as you can. Always start with like the newer ones that have just come out, and then naturally you'll just sort of find little gaps where people haven't quite written what you think, and the more you explore it, obviously the more you can tend to find then that yeah, there's something there or there isn't, and then that's the way that you can sort of plug that little hole and do your own research into it and fill the gap.
Yeah. Brilliant. I'm going to come to you with any 19th century queries now that I've got. Obviously, a lot of sort of your research, you'd have to have used archives. How did you come to find them and decide which ones were appropriate, and any advice for students, obviously, in the COVID period and the more digital access that we have to rely on? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the first, especially when I was an undergrad, the first approach was always I just went straight to the library catalogue. I looked on the databases, if there was anything that seemed relevant, so like 19th century British newspapers and periodicals, that was always like my go-to really. From there, I would sort of look at the databases that were available online, look at primary sources that were online first. If there was something that I knew I sort of wanted to look at or that was referenced and I couldn't find it online, then obviously I'd start looking more into like local archives and look at their catalogue collections. I'd say for my undergraduate and my master's, that was predominantly in-house sort of archive research. But actually for my PhD, I'd say 80% of it has been done online. And that's, I mean, I started it in 2017, so pre-COVID. But a lot of the stuff that I look at is newspapers, periodicals, leaflets, pamphlets, things like that. And a lot of them are now digitized online, which is great because you don't quite get the fun of like seeing the document in person and have that sort of first-hand experience, but it makes it so much more accessible. It cuts down on costs. It doesn't mean I have to pay for train tickets or things like that. And if it's 2 o'clock in the morning and I'm still researching and find the document that I need to find, it makes it a lot easier. So I'd always, the first port of call would always be check the databases on the library catalogue, look through that to see if there's anything you need, and then if you can't find exactly what you want online, even if you contact archives nowadays, a lot of the time they will digitize something, or they'll take a photocopy or a picture, and sometimes it's a small fee, but it doesn't generally tend to cost much, and you can always get it emailed to you. But yeah, start with the basics, go into the library and look through that first, and then build from that really.
Have you actually used the MRC, which is part of the University of Warwick? Have you managed to find anything within that collection?
Yeah, so they've got a collection of spiritualist photography that was on film, and they've digitized the images. So I've used some of them, and I've used like their sort of more general 19th century documents, just talking about like the political landscape and things like that. Because while it's good to have like a narrow focus, you still need to look at the broader sort of primary material that just reflects on that period.
I suppose you've got to place it in context, haven't you? And those sort of wider documents help you place it within, national feeling or, like international news feeling at the time.
So I'd say most of the stuff I got from the MRC was like the more broader, like focus stuff, but all the niche things I found basically online, and you can do like key term searches on like newspaper archives, and you can pick out like the exact article that you want. So it's really useful to just do it all online really. It's not as fun, but it's a lot easier to manage the research then and manage your time as well.
I suppose especially if you were an undergraduate as well, and you might not need to go into, you know, the length of a PhD and continue it that way, then using the online databases